Let's boldly go eat some strawberries while we hash over this week's
Initial thoughts. Part one. Initial thoughts. Part one. Initial thoughts.
Hey Trekkies! This review is covering the third episode of Strange New Worlds, Ghosts of Illyria. As always, spoilers ahead. For me, this is easily the best episode of modern Trek to date. Somehow, the writers, producers, director, and cast took one of the worst tropes in Star Trek history and knocked this one out of the park. Of course, I'm talking about the naked time plot that's been tried across multiple iterations of Trek and never any real success. Meanwhile, this episode takes the concept, gives us real character development even through insanity. I feel like I know most of these characters better after 3 episodes than about most of Discovery's crew after 4 seasons. Whatever wrongs you feel like Alex Kurtzman or any other boogeyman you'd like to use as a target have been to the franchise, this one single episode should redeem anyone's faith in the power of episodic Star Trek. I've enjoyed story arc Game of Thrones Trek more than most fans, but it took this episodic format with the most Game of Thrones name in Trek history to really make me feel like we're back in the 90s. And before I even get into specifics, I'm going to give this episode a general like, because it's so well crafted. We find a landing party combing through the dead ruins of a former alien colony of Augments known as the Illyrians. I have one of a few dislikes for Pike and landing party waiting to the very last possible second to try to get their team off a planet with frequent ion storms that's about to get hit with another ion storm. The infamous space weather boogeyman of the franchise. Trying to beam them up, Hemmer does some technobabble magic to get more power to the transporter so the crew can get back on board. We'll find out later that this action is what ends up causing most of the crew to become infected. After sinning Hemmer 2 weeks in a row for not seeing him at his station at all, I've got a like for this Einar genius. Though even he can't do anything when the storm completely sets in with Pike and Spock stranded on the planet. Let's get their subplot out of the way because it's short. They take shelter in a library, where Spock takes the time they have to learn what happened to these people. It's almost a callback to the real final episode of TOS, All Our Yesterdays, where they use a library on a world about to experience supernova to figure out what happened. In this case, what Spock finds is an augmented culture that tried to de-augment themselves just so they could join the Federation. It didn't go well and ended up making all the colonists kill each other with light. A few became riders on the ion storm and even helped protect Pike and Spock. I've got a like for Spock getting cut and showing that green ice water Bones was always being xeno-racist about. We've heard about it dozens of times and we finally get an on-screen look. Meanwhile, back on the Enterprise, we find out that anything prefaced with level 5 is the highest level of protocol when the ship is put under both a level 5 lockdown and ordered to undergo a level 5 ship-wide diagnostic. I have a like for when the episode starts getting crazy for Ortega's style, saying to this crazed crew member, "Whatever tweaks your freak, pal." She may be becoming my favorite character, but I'm not ready to make that judgment after only 3 episodes with an absolutely amazing cast. I've got another character like for finally addressing the 800-pound augmented gorilla in the room about La'an's connection to Khan. She's not directly an augment, but a descendant of Khan, whose seemingly only heightened ability is to resist sedatives. Before the series started, I thought the Augment story had been a bit overdone and was worried about where they were going with this. But I'm 100% on board now. Though that leads to another like for the big reveal that number 1 is an Illyrian augment. Apparently they're one of the hundreds of races that all appear human, and like Simon Tarsus, she lied on her Starfleet entrance application because of the ban on augments in the service. While I feel the eugenics wars augments have been done to death, introducing another race that's gone the genetic route and tying it in with a story like this episode tells is brilliant in my opinion. I have no idea if there's any real science behind this, but I'm giving a like for the way this contagion travels on waves of light and the zany yet incredible moments it sets up. Vitamin D deficiency causes the crew to become addicted to intense light. Uhura's roommates create a holographic star, Hemmer tries to beam molten material from the mantle of planet Hedimit 9 onto the ship, and La'an outdoes everyone by trying to create a warp core breach. I've got a cheeky like for when Una goes to sickbay and comes clean to Dr. M'Benga about being an Illyrian that's resistant to the disease, hoping he can use her antibodies to synthesize a cure. When he can't, she says, "You're a Starfleet doctor. There's always something you can do." This is basically the franchise poking fun at itself for doctors always coming up with a cure to whatever's happening just in the nick of time. Here's a follow-up like for Dr. M'Benga's words to Una just before he succumbs to the contagion about how bigotry never really dies. It just takes new forms in new times. Humans and Vulcans that had generally worked through their own bigotry amongst themselves find things to be bigoted towards each other about as they headed into space. Even though the bigotry we're talking about here is about augments that are strictly banned from joining Starfleet, with good reason, but that they're people too. And there are exceptions to every rule, which we'll come back to in a minute. In a supercut fight scene with about 1,000 split-second edits, we get the battle of the augments between La'an and Una. As precisely everyone saw coming, number 1 KOs La'an and restores warp core containment. She also discovers that because medical technobabble, chimeric antibodies transferred from her to La'an and is the cure? This literal bit of magic took me out of this otherwise wonderful episode. And for that, I have a dislike. Because if chimeric antibodies, why not just have Chapel synthesize some Cthulhu antivirals or whatever? She makes everyone well again, they retrieve the captain and science officer, and everything is rainbows and sunshine. So, why is there still a fair amount of time left in the run of this show? If you've watched my reviews for a while, you know I won't hesitate to dislike skipping the logical closure point. But, hold on, this one's going the other way to a like for this scene where Commander Chin Riley resigns her commission because of her now known augmentation. And Pike's like, whatever. If they throw you out, they'll have to throw me out, and then my known fate isn't a thing anymore. So you do you, number 1. Which again seems like the logical closure point until you realize where the next scene's going. Una goes down the chain of command to deal with Dr. M'Benga, who it turns out was sort of the cause of the whole epidemic. And you better believe I've got another like for him teaching Scotty everything he ever learned about transporter jury rigging. He's been holding his terminally ill daughter in the medical transport pattern buffer, hoping to seek out new medical techniques and boldly find a cure. He expects Una to reprimand him and maybe kick him out of Starfleet because of the entire crew, almost dying. But after Pike's compassion for her, she does him one better by giving the transporter a safer direct feed from the warp core. This sets up a cool plot to be continued down the road. And we're not done jumping the logical closure points here either, because I've got another like for Una recording a log entry about how she feels about Starfleet and her augmented nature, which at the end she deletes like Cisco at the end of the Pale Moonlight. And I have one final like for the best wipe transition ever done in Trek, where a bulkhead wall pushes all the way across the screen. Not a typical transition across the franchise, but absolutely the best use of it, to segue back to M'Benga bringing his daughter out of the buffer for story time. A beautiful ending to a beautiful episode. I am almost certain that when I eventually add this episode to my ranking of every live-action episode of the franchise, it will very likely make the top 100. This had everything anyone could possibly want in a Trek episode. A reused classic Trek trope, a few callbacks, some nice character development across the cast, action, trauma, a pinch of humor, and a message about bigotry. I can't wait to see what new worlds we'll strangely go to next week. Till then, keep your nacelles polished, and I've been your host, Dustin Wing.